obviously, I have to welcome you because it's Sunday night, and that's the job of the preacher on Sunday night. So welcome, everybody. And also, I need to remind you of a thing that was announced earlier, and that is the Sweetheart Banquet. If you want to be a part of the Sweetheart Banquet, just tell us. That's it. Just say, hey, I want to do that. I want to be there. I want to eat the food that Jennifer, Mom, what do I call her from the pulpit? Right? I want to eat that food. You know the food. You've all had it, right? I want to have some of that. And I want to enjoy the time together where we hang out and fellowship and grow closer together. So if you want to be a part of the banquet, I think there is a sign-up sheet. That would be ideal. But if you're not on the sign-up sheet and you just tell me or tell Mom, hopefully we'll remember you and we'll have food for you. No, we'll definitely have food for you. We were taking leftovers home last year. So anyway, this was a lot of fun last year. It was just a good time, real wholesome, really great time to spend with everyone. And we really hope more will come this time and enjoy the time together because that's what this is all about. The other thing is there's a thing happening tonight. I don't know if you're aware. That game thing, the thing, where they kill each other. And no, hold on. How did Dan put it today? He said, Taylor Swift is attending the Usher concert. Did y'all hear about that? Okay, so obviously there's a game happening tonight. Let me tell you something about me. You all know this. Some preachers on nights like this or on special holidays will preach in a certain way as to make a point, right? It doesn't matter. We're going to go long tonight. If I go long, I'm not making a single point, right? It wasn't on purpose, okay? That's number one. Number two, I'm kind of like Goldilocks. If I try to go short, I go really short. Like I think there's a lesson on YouTube right now that is 6 whole minutes long. I did that. That was me, all right? And then there's also one that's 56 whole minutes long. I also did that, okay? So I feel like I don't thread that needle very well, but I'm going to try. I promise. I'm going to try tonight because I know afterwards we've got that whole fellowship hall set up to, again, have some fellowship and enjoy time together. We are looking at themes in the Gospels, and we are in John. The Gospel of John is a little bit different than the other Gospels. If you are familiar with Bible study words, you'll hear the word synoptic gospels, and you know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels, basically just meaning they seem to share a lot of material. A lot of the same stories are in those gospels. John is not. It is the one non-synoptic gospel. So when John wrote his gospel, he wanted to portray Jesus as bringing the gospel, right? The good news of this new king and a new kingdom. And John does that completely differently than the other gospels. One of the things that's important about it is it was written much later, right? Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke were all written somewhere between 50 and 70 AD. John is believed to have been written a little closer to 90. So 70 to 90, somewhere between 20 and 25 years after these other gospels were written. All right? And so that kind of reflects itself in the way that John writes, specifically who his audience is. John doesn't seem as concerned with a specific audience like the other 3 gospels. John, really, his audience seems to be the world. They said, John, you can write a gospel. Who would you like to write it to? And he said, the world. It's a pretty bold move by John, but he does it incredibly well. So he writes this gospel really not to a specific group, but more to the entire world. It's got some unique characteristics. Like we already said, it's not a synoptic gospel. It's also got a different pacing. I don't know, you guys, I always do this with film, but have you noticed how indie films have slower pacing? Like when you're watching a movie and it's like a, summer blockbuster, it's a fast-paced movie. It's got a lot of stuff happening. It's an assault on your senses. And then you go and you watch the Sundance Film Festival's best drama or whatever, and it's really slow. They let you sit with tension. They tell the story differently. That's John's gospel. It's the off-speed pitch, right? John's gospel is much slower. He wants you to sit with these stories, and he's not as interested in packing as many things in as he can. He really wants you to see how Jesus interacts with people and then what happens after that. The other thing about John's gospel is, if you remember when we studied it in class, it is theme riddled. If we're talking about themes in the gospels and we get to John, the question is not what is the theme. The question is which one should we talk about, right? Because there are themes. I went back and looked at our notes and listened to some of the class when I was studying for this, and I think we had 8 different themes just in chapter 1 of John's gospel that we knew came up somewhere else in the gospel. Themes like water, light and dark, truth, grace and truth, themes like the seed or the offspring. All these different themes showed up in the first chapter of the Gospel of John. So it wasn't a question of what is the theme of John, but which theme are we going to pick out? And as I was looking through it, I felt like there were 2 more prominent themes than the others. I don't even want to say more prominent, but 2 themes that were weightier. They were a little heavier than the others. We've only done 1 theme for every other gospel. I told you I'm not making a point. So we're going to do another one next time, all right? We'll have a part 6. We're just going to tackle 1 theme tonight. The first one we're going to talk about is probably the one that came to most people's mind when you thought about the theme of the Gospel of John, and that is the theme of believe, all right? When you look at John's Gospel, one of the most prominent parts is the idea of belief. It comes up over and over and over again. While I was studying for this, one of the things I looked up just was factually, how many times does John use the word belief in his gospel? And it was over 100 times. The Greek word, or some conjugation of the Greek word, pistueo, was used over 100 times in his gospel. I mean, it is all over the place, him using this idea of belief and trying to communicate truths about that throughout his gospel. If you go all the way to the end of the gospel and look at chapter 20 in verse 30, he gives us the reason for writing his gospel when he says that Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So John, by the end of the gospel, makes it very clear. The prominent theme here, the thing I wanted you to take away is belief. Like, I don't want you to have like an intellectual idea of what belief is. I want you to believe after reading this book. In class, we talked about how John's gospel is agenda-driven. Like, he has a point that he wants you to take away, and that is, by the end, you will believe in Jesus. That's why John wrote his gospel. That's what he wants you to take away, and it's a very, very clear theme throughout the gospel as you read. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run through, I just went through the first half of the gospel, and we're going to look at the instances where people believe, or a couple of these spots where it talks about belief. And then we're going to take some lessons from it and hopefully wrap this up. So let's start, and we'll just look at John chapter 2. We're just going to start in John chapter 2. If you remember John, the big picture, the structure of John, you've got sort of an introduction. We call it the book of signs, the things Jesus did, the book of glory, which focuses on the crucifixion, and then a conclusion. That's sort of the big picture of his book. And this book of signs really begins in chapter 2. So chapter 2 begins with the wedding at Cana. And can I just tell you, as I went back and listened to some of our study on this, that was so much fun. That was such a fun study, going through John and looking at these stories that are told and asking questions with this stuff. I mean, I feel like I forgot so much of what we studied, but as I was listening to it again, I was just like, man, this book is incredible. It really is incredible, the way that John has written his gospel and the way that, obviously, through the inspiration of the Spirit, we have what we have in front of us today. Let's not read the entire passage here, but we know the story, that Jesus is at a wedding, and it specifies on the 3rd day that the wine for the wedding ran out. And Jesus' mom comes up to him and says, "We don't have any wine." And Jesus essentially says, "Why are you worried about the things that I'm in control of?" And then he takes care of things, all right? So then he fills up these 6 jars that were used for purification. These are purification jars. He takes the water in the jars and turns it into wine. The feast is able to continue. So when we talked about it in class, we talked about how Jesus rescued the wedding feast with blood in purification jars, like purifying blood on the third day, and we saw all the symbolism. I mean, I'm just dipping my toe into what we talked about in class. It was so cool. I want to go through the whole thing again. Anyway, Jesus does this. This story is incredible, and we know that at the end, the master of the feast, right, the master of the banquet says, what in the world? Normally, people put the good wine out first and then serve the bad wine after people have drunk plenty. You guys saved the very best wine for the end of the feast. And he's amazed at the hosts of the wedding feast. Then, if you look all the way down at verse 11, this, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory. And what happened? And his disciples believed in him, right? So Jesus does this miracle. He changes water to wine. He rescues the wedding feast. And the result is belief. These people had an interaction with Jesus, and by the end, they're like, yeah, he's the real deal, okay? Look at the next one here in chapter 2. Jesus goes into the temple, and he cleanses the temple at the Passover, right? So they're exchanging, they're offering the opportunity for people to buy their sacrifice at the temple instead of have to bring their sacrifice with them for the Passover, and they're doing it in the courtyard, which is the only place the Gentiles can be. Jesus shows up. He is livid that they are doing this, right? You're turning a house of worship into a den of robbers, which, den of robbers, they were selling sacrifices. I don't know. It sounds like a mall to me, So here's what Jesus does is he gets in there and he's angry because they're misusing God's house. And he starts turning over the tables and driving these people out of the temple. I don't remember if it's John in John, in verse 15, it says that he drives them out by making a whip of cords. So he didn't just say, hey, guys, it's really not right. You need to leave, right? Or, hey, look at this in the Bible. You're doing it wrong. He says, get out. And they don't move. He gets his whip ready. He says, let me say it again. Get out. And he drives these money changers out of the temple. And the Jews are livid about it, and so they're like, listen, if you're going to do something this bold, you have to show us a sign. In verse 18, what sign do you show us for doing these things? And Jesus responds with, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And the Jews then said, it's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. When, therefore, he was raised up from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and what'd they do? They believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. So they have this interaction. And by all accounts, the people who interacted with Jesus were initially perplexed, to say the least, right? He said, are you going to give us a sign? Sure. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. 3 days? It took 46 years to build this temple, right? Maybe in Flower Mound, he would say, destroy this building and I'll have a permit in 2 days. And they'd say, 2 days. It took us 25 years to get a building permit in Flower Mound, right? That's the idea that you're dealing with here. So Jesus he's got them confused. But John pokes his head in as the narrator. And he says, hey, by the way, we were confused too. But after the cross, we came back and we remembered what he said and we believed, right? You got people interacting with Jesus, and the result is belief in Jesus. Let's skip. We're going to put a pin in chapter 3, and we're going to skip down to John 4 and verse 53. Yeah, John 4 and verse 53. Jesus he's healing an official's, I believe it's a Roman official's son. And so this Roman official has a child who's gotten sick, and he is on death's doorstep, and he goes to Jesus and says, listen, please come heal my son. And in verse 50, Jesus said, go, your son will live. And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Okay, so he believes it when Jesus says it, which is awesome. Because truthfully, he hasn't exactly experienced Jesus at this point, has he? I mean, in the story, he comes to Jesus and he says, my son is sick, he needs to be healed. Jesus says, okay, he will be. And he just believes him right there, which is incredible, okay? Especially in contrast to the last two stories. But it's an incredible amount of trust and faith that the man demonstrates. Then, if you skip down to verse 53, the father, when he gets home, he says he's interacting. He sees that his son is recovering, and he's asking them, when did this happen? And they said, it happened at the 7th hour, the fever left him. Verse 53, the father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live, and he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So now you've got the interaction, right? Now you see, he comes home after he believed Jesus, and he gets home and he sees, my son is well. That's incredible. Let me make sure this was Jesus and not coincidence. He says, what time did he get well? And they said, well, it was yesterday at, 3 o'clock roughly. And he says, 3 o'clock? You guys are not going to believe this. That is the exact moment that Jesus said he was going to get well. And it says he himself believed. I thought he already believed. Well, he believed more. He believed more. And then, not just him, who else? It says his whole household believed. See, these people interacted with Jesus and they believed. Then they believed some more. And then that belief spread to the whole household of this Roman official. Let's skip ahead to chapter 6. Look at chapter 6. There's a lot that happens in chapter 5. Honestly, as I was going through this, I feel like you could stop at every story and ask. Like if you just read through, and do this on your own, because I think it'd be really, really fruitful. If you just read through the Gospel of John, and after every interaction, or in the middle of the interactions, you say, do they believe or do they not? What kind of person is believing? What kind of person is not believing? It's a really pointed message that John is trying to communicate here. Anyway, chapter 6, if you go all the way down to, in chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000, and he feeds the 5,000 with just the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and you get all the way down to verse 14. The word belief is not here, but look at what the people say. Verse 14, when the people saw the sign that he had done. Again, what was the sign? It was feeding 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. I know I said we're going to watch that game over there. We only have 1 pizza, though, right? See, like that's what's going on with the people here. They think there's no way you're going to be able to feed that many people with such little food, and yet Jesus does, and it's incredible. And they have to take up leftovers. Just imagine if we go over to watch this football game, the right team wins. I'm not saying who that is, but the right team wins, and we have leftovers after only having 1 pizza to start. It would be astounding. We'd be talking about that for years. It'd be that one Super Bowl win. You know what I'm saying? We dictate time by before and after the pizza incident at the Flower Mound Church of Christ, right? So after this sign happens, when the people saw this sign that he had done in verse 14, they said, this indeed is the prophet who is to come into the world. Obviously, they're referencing some Old Testament prophecy about a prophet like Moses that would arise from among them. And they're saying, this guy, he's the prophet. So do they believe? You bet. They believe to the point of saying, this guy's fulfilling the Old Testament that we have been waiting for generations. We believe big time, right? So these people believe after experiencing a miracle. Jesus feeds 5,000 people with 1 pizza. It's the way I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life now because I made that example. He feeds 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. And these people, after their experience with Jesus, they believe. Skip on down another. I hate skipping when there's so much cool stuff in here. But if you skip all the way down to the very end of the chapter, Jesus gives some teaching that is called hard teaching. The people grumble, which brings up echoes of Moses and the people in the wilderness. And after the people grumble about Jesus' teaching, which the teaching, it was weird teaching, right? He unapologetically says, eat my body and drink my blood, please, right? Go ahead and do that. And they kind of push him on it, and he says, no, I'm the bread of life. Eat my body, drink my blood. And a lot of people left because of this, and so Jesus turns to his disciples and says, do you guys want to go too? Like, everyone else is leaving. Maybe you guys were just in this because you saw the crowd. Maybe you weren't in it for me. You just saw the crowd, and you thought, hey, I'm going to be a part of it. Here's your chance to leave. Everyone's leaving. If you want to go too, you go ahead and go. And Peter answers in verse 68, Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And that's normally where we stop. But look at what he says in 69. And we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Right? These disciples, they believed before. Right? And earlier, we saw them believe at Cana, at the wedding. We saw them believe at the temple. But here he says, no doubt. No doubt. Where else would we even go? Because we've come to believe. We've come to know, and we have believed. We have believed, and we have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. These disciples have been following Jesus around for a while. In fact, they had been following him around for so long that when he made the statement, please eat my body and drink my blood, I said, where else are we going to go? I mean, if that's the way, then that's the way. But this guy, he's the one we've been waiting for. We believe it, right? Their belief was so strong at that point that they couldn't even be chased away. Just a couple more we're going to look at. Chapter 7 and verse 30. Chapter 7 and verse 30. So Jesus is at the Feast of Booths. There's some division coming up because of his teachings. And when you get down to verse 30, let's look at verse 30. Yeah, okay. So they were seeking to arrest him after this. Some people are thinking he is the Christ. Some people are thinking he's a lunatic or a blasphemer. And in verse 30, it says that they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. And many of the people believed in him. And they said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? I mean, there are people following Jesus, and they see his teaching, and they're like, I mean, surely even the Christ that we're waiting for won't do more amazing things than what this guy is doing. And it says that they did what? They believed. You got people interacting with Jesus, and the result is belief. Last one, verse chapter 9. Chapter 9, you've got this story, a really cool story about this. I think I said when we studied it, you have to call him the formerly blind man because he didn't stay blind, right? So there's this man who is blind from birth, and Jesus interacts with him. He comes up to him, and his disciples are curious. Is it because this guy did something wrong? Is it because of his sin that he's blind, or was it his parents' sin that they were being punished by having a blind son? And Jesus is like, that's not like option C. Like, it's neither of those. In fact, part of the reason he's blind is so that I can be glorified. And so he goes up to the man, spits on the ground, makes some mud, wipes it on his eyes, ew, ew, and more ew, and tells him, go wash it off. When the man goes and washes it off, he can see. Suddenly, he can see. And one thing I think is cool about this story is the blind man hasn't seen Jesus at this point, right? He's interacted with him, but he has literally never seen Jesus. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's an important detail towards the end of the story. So he hasn't seen Jesus, and then he's questioned by all sorts of people. Are you the guy that was blind? No, it's not him. And the other people would say, yeah, it is him. And he kept saying, it is definitely me. And then the Pharisees got wind of it, and they said, okay, tell us what happened. Tell us what really happened here. Because this guy is healing on Sabbaths in the past, and we want to get him. And so he tells them, I don't even know who it was. I've never seen him, right? I don't even know who it was. But this man came and put mud on my eyes, told me to wash. I did, and now I can see. Then the Pharisees are not satisfied with that, so they go get the guy's parents. They're like, was he really blind from birth? And they're like, yeah. They're like, okay, well, how is he made clean? How can he see now? And they're like, we have no idea. Don't say a word, right? It says that they're fearful of the Pharisees. All right. So then the Pharisees go back to the formerly blind man and they say, tell us again what happened. And the blind man gets some moxie to him. He says, oh, do you guys want to follow him too? Right? You guys are really interested in this fella, right? And they're like, no, he's a sinner. And he's like, I don't know if he's a sinner. I don't even know who he is. But I do know that I was blind and now I can see. So they left him alone after that. In verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast this man out. And having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the formerly blind man answered, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. You've got this interaction, right? And what's so cool about this one is there's a very clear contrast. The Pharisees have interacted with Jesus how many times to this point in the Gospel of John? They won't even believe the person who had the miracle happen to them. And yet this blind man is willing to believe as soon as he knows who it is he's meant to believe in. The second he finds out, he says, "I believe," and he falls down and worships. An interaction with Jesus leads to belief. All right, here's the pattern. I think you might be seeing it. When people interact with Jesus, what happens? They believe. When people interact with Jesus, they believe. Now, here's the last part of this that's really important. Belief is not just an intellectual assent. Notice a difference. Go back to chapter 3 and chapter 4. Notice the difference in Nicodemus and the woman at the well. There's a distinct difference in these two interactions. They might have been put next to each other on purpose. I'm just saying, John does that stuff to us. So he has this interaction with Nicodemus in John chapter 3. And starting in verse 1, it says, "Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. And this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, 'Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him.'" Let me ask you right now, does Nicodemus believe or does he not? I mean, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? It sure sounds like Nicodemus is logically and intellectually there. I'm seeing what you're doing. The only explanation is God. Therefore, he says these words, "You are a teacher come from God." Right? Nicodemus believes that Jesus is from God. But how does this story end? Well, Jesus makes a confusing statement, which is totally on brand for John's depiction of Jesus. He confuses people more than he enlightens people initially in his interactions. And then Nicodemus is confused, and then Jesus teaches Nicodemus, and then Nicodemus is still confused. In verse 9, he says, "How can these things be?" And Jesus says, "Are you a teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things?" Right? And so Nicodemus actually leaves this interaction confused. He believes that Jesus is from God, but he's out of here, and he doesn't follow Jesus. He doesn't tell anyone about Jesus. In fact, the next time we see Nicodemus, he's back with his Pharisee buddies in chapter 7, right? Nicodemus doesn't change. Nothing happens. He clearly believes that Jesus is from God, but he does not do anything differently as a result of that. Look at the difference in the woman at the well. As Jesus is interacting with her, the woman at the well, he has this interaction where, he shouldn't be talking to a woman. Culturally, that was frowned upon. He shouldn't be talking to this woman because no one should be, because she was an outcast. And he certainly shouldn't be eating or drinking with her. And he asks her, the first words out of his mouth are, "Give me a drink." And eventually, she does, and he tells her about this living water, and she's like, "Well, I kind of want some of that." Then he gives her this test. He says, "Go call your husband." And she says, "I don't have a husband." And he's like, "Yeah, you're right, because you've had 5, and the man you're with now isn't your husband." And she's like, "Whoa, okay, you're a prophet. I have a question for a prophet. Where should we worship? Because there's been some division about this question." And he's like, "Listen, option number C, okay? You're not worshiping on the mountain. You're not worshiping in Jerusalem. You worship God who is a spirit and in truth." Like, this is a completely different question than what you're actually asking. And then his disciples end up coming back. And, then she says that the Messiah is meant to be coming, and he says, "I am he." And then his disciples come back, and they're very confused. Why are you even talking to this woman? She's a Samaritan, she's a woman, and she's, not a great woman to be talking with socially. Okay. They don't say anything. But then they are trying to get Jesus to eat. He talks about how his food is from God, and they're confused. And then, if you skip all the way down to verse 39, it says, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of what? Because of the woman's testimony. She said, he told me all that I ever did. And so when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. And they said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. See, do you see the difference between the woman and Nicodemus? Nicodemus had every reason to believe. He had seen the signs. He had seen the wonders. Nicodemus had interacted with Jesus. Then he has a one-on-one with Jesus, and he comes away from it confused. He didn't do anything different. The woman at the well interacts with Jesus. She sees probably a lot less wonders than Nicodemus had seen. And she believes. And what does her belief cause her to do? Go and tell it. She takes off and she says, you guys have to hear about this guy. He told me everything I ever did. Everything. And so they believe her because they heard about her. Then they interact with Jesus themselves and they say, we don't even believe because of you anymore. We believe because we've gotten to see it for ourselves. You see, belief, as John seems to define it, you notice he doesn't ever say Nicodemus believed, right? He says the woman believed. He doesn't ever say Nicodemus believed. Belief to John seems to be more than an intellectual assent or a knowing that something is true. Belief seems to be implicitly coupled with action. When you believe, you will go and tell. It's the supernatural overflow of someone that truly believes in Jesus, that they will go and tell other people to believe in Jesus. Now, one last thing. In this book, it's incredible. Okay. In chapter 1, when Jesus is calling his disciples, John the Baptizer says, that is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And John's followers quit following John and start following Jesus. And one of those is Andrew. And when Andrew follows Jesus and believes in Jesus, Andrew believes, and what does belief do in John's gospel? It cajoles you into going and telling other people to believe. So Andrew believes in Jesus, and then he goes and gets his brother, right? And he gets Simon, all right? Then you have Philip, who believes, and he goes and gets Nathanael, right? So you've got this story where the people who believe in Jesus and want to follow Jesus will go and get other people to also believe in Jesus and follow Jesus, okay? Then you think about who wrote the gospel. Wasn't it John? Okay, so John was someone who believed in Jesus and followed Jesus. Did he go get anybody? Hold on. Why did he write his gospel again? So that you might believe. John went and got the world, all right? John went and he said, listen, you see what's happening in this book. Now, let me tell you what I'm doing with this book. I believed, and I'm going to get other people to believe too. I wrote this whole book so that you might believe in him. The implication is, if you read this book and you believe in Jesus, what do? It's open-ended, right? It doesn't tell you in the book, and now you have to go. The other Gospels have a pretty clear go into all the world. You got to go do something, right? Matthew has it. Mark has it for sure. You've got none of that in John. Instead, you have a picture. You have a picture of people, when they believe in Jesus, what do? They go tell other people. The implication is, if you read this book and you believe in Jesus, you're going to go tell people about Jesus, right? You're going to go show people what it means to interact with Jesus. Listen, the challenge tonight is very simple. We could just say, believe in Jesus and leave it there. And I think that would be a beautiful challenge from John's gospel. It's what he says he wants the gospel to do, is instill belief in the reader. But this is not just an intellectual assent. This is a challenge to believe in Jesus and put it into practice. Do what John writes about. Do what John did by writing about it. and go bring other people to believe in Jesus as well. Bring other people into encounters with Jesus. Because you notice, what instills belief in these people? It is their interaction with Jesus. They see him teaching, and they're like, man, incredible, we believe. They see him doing incredible miracles, and they're like, wow, we believe. They see how he interacts with people, and they say, wow, we believe. So bring other people into encounters with Jesus. Bring them into encounters with his word. Show them something in the Bible. Talk to people about the Bible. Let people encounter Jesus through his word. Let people encounter Jesus through his love, right? And as much as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it for me. Show people the love of Jesus. Let them encounter Jesus when they interact with you by showing them love that is like Jesus. Let people interact with Jesus through his body. Bring people around us. We're weird. I know. All of us are pretty strange people. It's the truth of the matter, all right? But when they see, I've heard so many visitors come to church with us and say, man, there's something different about this place. You guys, I heard one person say, you guys like each other, right? Like, we do, you know? Bring people to Jesus' body. Let them interact with Christ through his body. And then like Dad mentioned this morning, bring people into an encounter with Jesus through his forgiveness. Forgive radically. I will never forget, and I will never stop using this example. When a man named Botham Jean was killed here in Dallas by an off-duty police officer, and they were on trial, and she was convicted of killing Botham Jean, and his brother took the stand, and he just said, listen, I wish you didn't even have to go to jail. I forgive you. I know that God forgives you. I mean, it was incredible. It's one of the most Christ-like forgiveness moments I have ever witnessed in my life. Bring people into an encounter with Jesus by showing them his forgiveness. And the list of ways that we can help people encounter Jesus could be a lot longer. But I did hear something about a game tonight. Joking. I just wrote a couple down to get our wheels turning. Listen. Believe in Jesus, not just intellectual assent, but put it into practice. Gather people. Bring them into encounters with Jesus, his love, his word, his body, his forgiveness, his grace, his mercy. Because when people interact with Jesus, what happens? They believe. Isn't that what we all want for those in our life? It's for people to believe in Jesus like we have, to know the truth, to hear the good news, the gospel. What is the gospel? It's the good news about a new king and a new kingdom. And in that kingdom, we all get to be a part of the family. That's the message, and that's the challenge tonight. If you have the need of the church to believe in Jesus, or if you have the need of prayer, whatever you have need of tonight, you can come forward and let us know while we stand and sing.